Hello and welcome back to Born to Rant. I'm Brandon, and this week we are talking about a movie so infamous that 30 plus years later we still can't stop talking about it. A movie that so perfectly captured its gothic tone and visuals that no one has been able to replicate it since. And a movie that gave us one of the best songs in The Cure's discography. That's right, today we are diving deep into 1994's The Crow, how the story of the movie became just as important as the story in the movie, why we're all still watching it every year on Devil's Night, and its legacy all these years later.
It's a costume party, but nobody better show up as the Crow.
Directed by Alex Proyas and starring the late Brandon Lee, The Crow has become one of the most infamous productions in Hollywood history. Famously, Brandon Lee was tragically shot and killed in an on-set accident, but even the tragedy of the film aside, the movie itself still holds up today. I feel like The Crow is a movie that can and is still capturing new fans' imaginations today. Not only is the story of a man and his fiancée being murdered and him coming back from the dead for revenge something that people really attach to, but the look of this movie is something that just still looks legitimately awesome in 2025. At the time of The Crow's release, Hollywood was still in its early days of being obsessed with superhero movies. By this point, we'd already gotten Tim Burton's Batman movies, but also Dick Tracy and The Rocketeer. But unlike those movies, The Crow was never meant to be an all-ages family-friendly adventure. This was always supposed to be a dark, violent, and adult-themed R-rated movie, and I think that's why we so rarely hear The Crow get lumped in with the other comic book movies of the 90s. Sure, it's based on a comic and even features a lot of the same noir and Art Deco influences as Burton's Batman movies, and even The Shadow, but the grit and tragedy of The Crow are really what set it apart. As for me, I'm sure like some of you watching, I actually heard about The Crow and the legacy of the movie before I ever saw it. I was born in 1990, so I was only 4 when this movie originally came out, but I remember hearing about the tragic death of Brandon Lee at way too young of an age. As far as seeing The Crow for the first time, I couldn't have been any older than 12, and I remember just being fully bought into this gritty, gothic world of resurrection and the chaos of Devil's Night. But it was a couple years later when the emo explosion happened and I started getting into bands that would list The Crow as one of their favorite movies that I really got into this movie and started watching it pretty much anytime it would play on cable, which was a lot in the 2000s. And I just grew to love and appreciate everything about this movie, from the performances of Brandon Lee, Ernie Hudson, and Michael Wincott, to the cinematography of Darius Wolski, and we can't forget production designer Alex McDowell. All of it works together to create a world that felt so dark and different that I couldn't help but get sucked into the world the movie had set up. And before we go any further, just a reminder, Born to Rant is made entirely by me, a real person. No AI, no corporate backing. If you want to help support the channel, there's a link to the Patreon in the description below. Additionally, I have to give a quick thank you to all of my subscribers who voted in this month's Halloween Madness poll. In case you missed it, Born to Rant subscribers were responsible for picking every single movie I covered in the month of October. So if you want to vote in future polls, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's talk about how The Crow came to be. The Crow was created by James O'Barr in the 1980s after the death of his fiancée, who was killed by a drunk driver. And in 1989, The Crow was published as a 4-issue miniseries, and the premise of the book was fairly straightforward. A man and his fiancée are murdered the night before their wedding. 1 year later, the man rises from the grave and finds that he's invincible, so he sets out to take his revenge. And even though it was an indie book, The Crow sold pretty well and immediately got the attention of Hollywood, who is now in the post-Batman Gold Rush era that I've talked about in other videos. But actually, the first pitch that O'Barr ever heard for a Crow adaptation was for it to be turned into a musical with Michael Jackson as the lead, which O'Barr actually laughed at upon hearing, thinking that the studio was just joking around, but they weren't. Cut to a bit later, and O'Barr would team up with writer John Shirley and producer Jeff Most. But the movie really got some momentum once producer Edward Pressman and his company Pressman Film came aboard as a producing partner. And with that momentum, they were able to get Paramount Pictures to agree to finance and release the movie. Director Alex Proyas was hired based on the strength of his experience directing music videos for groups like INXS and Sting. He also apparently had one of the most impressive reels that Jeff Most had ever seen, really showcasing that Proyas had a strong strong understanding of tone, color, and lighting, and how the three work together. As for casting, it sounds like Brandon Lee was the actor that Proyas and the producers had their eye on from the start. And once Lee signed on, he also really helped shape the movie, telling the team that they should lose the other supernatural elements that had been added into the script and really focus on Eric Draven as being the lone supernatural element. He and Proyas also really wanted to shoot The Crow in black and white, and were told there was no way that that was going to happen. So instead, the two planned together to make the movie as devoid of color as possible. It sounds like the rest of the cast was really anchored around Brandon Lee, and most everyone had to audition for their roles. As for filming, the decision was made to film in Wilmington, North Carolina, at the suggestion of director Steve Barron, who'd also just shot a gritty comic book movie there called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And he'd had a great experience there and told Jeff Most all about it. Now, the filming for this movie was not fun. Even if you put the tragic events to the side, we're talking about a movie that takes place 95% at nighttime and has rain in nearly every single scene, which means that the cast and crew were working nights for a majority of the entire shoot. Now, there was one quote that really stuck out to me when doing research for this video, and unfortunately there's no name attributed to it other than one crew member, but the person described the production of The Crow as, quote, "They were trying to make a $30 million movie on an $18 million budget." And I think that combined with the lack of union crew members, a schedule of strictly night shoots, and an inexperienced director all led to the tragic events that happened during the filming of this movie. I mean, even on the first day of production, things were not looking great because a crew member on a crane was hit by a power line, which caused severe burns. There's also been a lot of talk over the years that cocaine use was rampant on set, with Brandon Lee apparently having quipped that someone just lost $50 after hearing someone sneeze on set. As far as the tragic death of Brandon Lee goes, I think we all know the story at this point, but here's a quick version just in case you don't already know. On March 31st, 1993, while filming one of his final scenes in the movie, where Eric and his fiancée Shelley are killed, Brandon Lee was shot by a prop gun that had a dummy round lodged in its barrel, causing the gun to essentially fire a bullet at full power directly into Lee's abdomen, which after 6+ hours of surgery ultimately led to his death. And this really was a perfect storm of inexperience and negligence. The firearms specialist for the movie had been sent home for the day by the producers to save some money, which led to the prop assistant being put in charge of the firearms for the movie, and they were unaware about checking the barrel for projectiles. And again, it was really just a perfect storm of horrible incidents that led to the death of Brandon Lee. And this is exactly why trained professionals are so important on a movie set. In the aftermath of the shooting, there were no criminal charges filed, as it was determined to be an accident caused by negligence and not malicious intent. Lee's mother also filed a lawsuit, which was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount of money. There was also the decision that needed to be made about what to do with the movie. On the one hand, Paramount just decided to wash their hands of the movie and back out of releasing it entirely. But the producers and Lee's family agreed that finishing and releasing the movie is what Brandon Lee would have wanted. So at this point, Miramax, owned by the Weinstein losers, stepped in and gave the production an additional couple $1,000,000 to finish the movie, which included using cutting-edge CGI to finish Lee's last couple of scenes, which took the budget up to approximately $23 million. And on May 13th, 1994, The Crow was released into the world, and on its opening weekend, it made $11.7 million against its $23 million budget, and placed first at the box office. The movie would go on to make a worldwide total of $52.2 million, making it a big win for Miramax, and probably had Paramount kicking themselves for giving the movie up, especially after the movie was released on home video and made an additional $40 to $50 million by some estimates. And shockingly, critics also mostly really liked The Crow, with all of them praising Brandon Lee's performance and also pointing to the wonderful cinematography and production design done by Darius Wolski and Alex McDowell. And with all of that out of the way, I think it's time that we dive deep into The Crow and everything that's made it the cult classic it's become. Before we go any further, here is your one and only spoiler warning for a 30-year-old movie.
Are you some kind of ghost? Boo.
And before we dive deep into the plot, I'd like to talk about 3 aspects of the movie that I think really help set it apart: the music, the production design, and the cinematography. So when I say I want to talk about the music of The Crow, I don't necessarily just mean the excellent score composed by Graham Revel, although its dark, gothy, noirish score really is fantastic and really helps elevate several scenes in the movie. But the movie also has a killer soundtrack and several great needle drops. Like I said in the intro, I think this movie has one of the best songs in The Cure's discography, but it also features tracks from the Jesus and Mary Chain and Helmet, and it's also got Nine Inch Nails covering Joy Division, Pantera covering Poison Idea, Rollins Band covering a name that if I say it will get me demonetized, so we'll say the band's name was Unalive, and Rage Against the Machine reworking an old unreleased song from Zach De La Rocha's hardcore band Inside Out. I mean, the thing just cannot be argued with as far as 90s hard rock goes. As far as the production design for The Crow is concerned, Alex McDowell knocked it out of the park. Every single set piece in this movie, every street corner feels real and lived in, and like you can smell the mildew forming from the constant rain. And McDowell did such a great job on this movie that he's gone on to have a fantastic career doing production design for movies like Fight Club, Minority Report, and even B-Movie.
Looking sharp.
Now, one of the things that I think really helps elevate the cinematography found in The Crow is that Alex Proyas hired comic book artist and fellow Australian Peter Pound to tackle the storyboarding for the movie, and he drew all of the storyboards like comic panels. I think that, combined with the fact that cinematographer Darius Wolski absolutely understood the assignment. This movie really is the perfect balance between German expressionism and noir styles of filmmaking. Even the opening of the movie, where we see Ernie Hudson's Albrecht standing in the window of Eric and Shelley's apartment, strikes this balance perfectly, while also looking like a comic book panel that's filled with real people living and moving inside of it. And I think that's actually the perfect place for us to begin talking about the plot of the movie. We open on the night that Eric and Shelley are killed. We meet Sarah and Albrecht. As far as Sarah, played by Rochelle Davis, is concerned, we're told immediately that Shelley and Eric were her sort of unofficial guardians. And Rochelle Davis really does a fantastic job in this movie. I'm not really sure why she hasn't done much acting since this, but she's really good here. Now, let's talk the resurrection of Eric Draven, because I think this is another one of those sequences that really set the movie apart. We watch Brandon Lee quite literally crawl his way out of the earth, shivering as he does. I love these shots of him in the alleyway. It kind of reminds me of Darkman, honestly, but realistically, I think alleyways are just natural places for superheroes to have moments of rebirth thrust upon them. And again, it looks just like a comic book. But we're then introduced to the four people most directly responsible for Eric and Shelley's deaths. We've got David Patrick Kelly as T-Bird, Angel David as Skank, Michael Massey as Funboy, and Lawrence Mason as Tintin. And one thing I have to say about these four is that I think Lawrence Mason steals absolutely every scene he's in. Like, when I think about this movie, he's the first villain I think of. Not T-Bird, not Top Dollar, it's my boy, Tintin. But I really love the introduction of these four in the bar, talking about all the mayhem they're going to cause during Devil's Night. And I especially love the touch of them all swallowing bullets with their shots. It's just absolutely insane. We then cut back to see Eric fully transforming into the Crow and putting on his iconic makeup and the all black outfit. And of course, the whole thing is set to The Cure's Burn, which again, top 5 song in their discography, if you ask me. Once Eric hits the streets, the first person that the Crow takes him to is Tintin.
Halloween ain't till mañana.
And this is actually my favorite fight in the whole movie. I love how much of it is Tintin taunting him and being cocky before my boy Eric pulls a Jack Burton and catches and throws back a knife like a badass. But after the death of Tintin, we get our introduction to the proper villains of the movie: Tony Todd as Grange, Bai Ling as Micah, and Michael Wincott as Top Dollar. And I love that we're introduced to Micah and Top Dollar's enjoyment of both murder and consuming eyeballs. The whole sequence does an excellent job of setting up just how deranged these two are, and it doesn't even introduce the deranged fact that these two are brother and sister. It's then time for Eric to go to the pawn shop and meet all-time great character actor John Polito as the sketchy pawn shop owner. And I love Eric quoting Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven here.
I heard a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door.
Especially when you consider the joke that there's actually no crows in this movie. All of the animal actors that were used were actually ravens. But anyway, in the pawn shop, these two have a great back and forth, and we see just how easy it is for Eric to recover from things like gunshot wounds. And I've always loved this little bit of him closing his eyes while feeling through the engagement rings, plus the line,
"Each one of these is a life you helped destroy."
goes so hard, but not as hard as him blowing up the pawn shop a couple seconds later. But Eric's got places to be and other people to kill, and the next stop is Funboy, who's currently shooting up heroin and fooling around with Darla, who happens to be Sarah's mom. And I specifically love the fact that not only does Eric get to get revenge on Funboy, but he also gets to drain the drugs from Darla's vein. Honestly, this could have made an awesome anti-drug commercial. So with 2 of the 4 men down, Eric decides to take a detour and he goes to visit Albrecht at his home and kinda sorta explain what's going on with him. I mean, he doesn't really get it either, but he does his best. There are 2 highlights here for me. The first is Eric telling Albrecht he's still wearing his hat, and then of course this unscripted moment of him saying,
"You shouldn't smoke these. They'll kill you."
There's also this wonderful moment of him learning that Albrecht stayed with Shelley for all 30 hours of her being in the hospital, in pain and dying, and he's able to absorb that memory from him because crow powers, which will come back into play in the finale. But again, Eric's got places to be and more people to kill, so this time he finally goes after T-Bird, and we get this iconic shot of the crow logo and gasoline and flames, and it just rocks. This is also intercut with Top Dollar, Micah, and Grange talking to Polito's character and learning about the man who can heal from gunshots, which of course is really intriguing to both Top Dollar and Micah's crazy asses. We also get this great little scene of Sarah and Darla reconciling, and after this, Sarah treks to Shelley and Eric's old apartment, and she and Eric finally get to reconnect and hug, and it's just a very sweet little moment. And later that night, it's time for the classic comic book movie mob roundtable scene where all of the city's criminals come together. And this is Michael Wincott's real time to shine. He gives this great monologue about how Devil's Night has become commercialized, so their plan is basically to burn the entire city of Detroit to the ground so that people will be afraid of Devil's Night again. But in walks Eric, who makes it very clear that he just wants Skeg, and of course, Top Dollar says no. So the rest of the baddies open fire on Eric and think they've won until he pops up and just starts mowing these dudes down with their own guns, and it goes so hard, especially when Eric gets to throw Skank out the window. Plus, we get another great comic book moment when Albrecht pulls up in his car just at the right moment to give Eric a ride to safety. There's then just this quick scene between Top Dollar, Micah, and Grange where they discuss the power of the crow and how much they want it for themselves, and the 3 begin scheming. But at this point, Eric feels like his mission is done. He goes to the cemetery where he finds Sarah and gives her Shelley's engagement ring before climbing back into his grave. Unfortunately, right as Sarah walks away, Grange snatches her off the street, which leads to our climax set at an old church. Kind of like Batman, right? Anyway, upon Eric and the crow entering the church, the crow is shot but not killed, though it does rob Eric of his powers. But I've always loved Michael Wincott saying,
Caw, bang, fuck, I'm dead!
And also Eric's reaction to getting shot and not healing immediately. As far as this final fight goes, the main things to call out are how badass it is when the crow claws out Micah's eyes, and of course, Eric transferring all of the pain of Shelley's death into Top Dollar, which causes him to fall and be impaled on a massive spike on the church. And I love the aftermath of Eric lighting the cigarette for Albrecht and then disappearing back to the cemetery, where Shelley's spirit comes to welcome him and help put him back to rest. So, 30 plus years later, what is the legacy of The Crow? Well, like I said, it's one of the most infamous productions in Hollywood history. It's a tragic story of art imitating death, imitating art, imitating death. James O'Barr said that after the death of Brandon Lee, he almost wished he'd never written The Crow. And poor Michael Massey, who pulled the fatal trigger that ended Brandon Lee's life, had nightmares for the rest of his life until his passing in 2016. But Alex Proyas and Darius Wolski would go on to work together again 5 years later on Dark City. Go check out my Dark City video if you haven't yet. And Wolski would also go on to have a crazy career that includes shooting the first 4 Pirates of the Caribbean movies. But ultimately, I think that the legacy of The Crow is the legacy of Brandon Lee. He left behind this tragic character and story, and the movie is even dedicated to him and his fiancée, Eliza, who were set to be married just a few weeks after filming on The Crow was completed. And yes, there were a string of straight-to-DVD sequels released over the years, but they all received very negative reviews, and honestly, I've never had the desire to see any of them, nor did I see the 2024 remake starring Bill Skarsgård. Now, I don't think it's necessarily impossible to make another movie based on The Crow and have it be good, but I also don't know what the right circumstances are for that to happen, because there's just so much history with the property overall. But let me know in the comments, what do you guys think? Will we ever get another movie based on The Crow that's as good as this one? If you've made it this far into the video, thank you for watching. It truly means the world. And as always, a very special thank you to all of my supporters over on Patreon. You all truly make these videos possible. If you're curious about joining the the Patreon, there's a link in the description below. Patrons get early, ad-free access to videos, access to an exclusive Discord server, and they get to help me choose what movies get covered on the channel. And before we go, just one final reminder that Born to Rant is a completely independent channel, and your support is what keeps us going. So please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We release new videos covering all of your childhood favorites every Thursday at 7 a.m. Pacific time. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.